We've all heard about the 1967 Six-Day War and the Nakba, the setback that permanently reshaped the Middle East. Growing up, we were always taught that the United States was Israel's #1 backer during this conflict. But here is the bizarre and shocking twist. Right in the middle of the war, just a few miles off the northern coast of Egypt, Israel brutally attacked an American ship. The assault began with airstrikes using rockets, cannons, and bombs, followed by a relentless onslaught from torpedo boats. By the time the smoke cleared, 34 American servicemen were dead, and 171 others were wounded. So what exactly went down that day? Let's dive into the harrowing story of the USS Liberty. A research vessel or a spy cover. In early June 1967, while the Middle East was a powder keg due to the Six-Day War fought by Israel against Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, the U.S., which claimed to be strictly neutral at the time, dispatched a ship named the USS Liberty to international waters in the eastern Mediterranean. She anchored off the Egyptian coast, right near the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula. On paper, the Liberty was lightly armed, carrying only 4.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns. These were basic weapons meant for close-range defense against small boats, which made sense because the ship was officially classified as a technical research ship. However, what the world didn't know back then was that this classification was just a cover. In reality, she was a highly sophisticated electronic intelligence vessel belonging to the National Security Agency, NSA. Her real mission was to intercept radio communications and track Soviet and Arab military movements, gather all signals and wireless chatter in the region, and beam them straight back to Washington. The ship was packed with the cutting-edge spy tech of the era. Her crew included specialized linguists, 3 fluent in Russian and 3 in Arabic. Washington's main goal was to figure out what the Soviets were plotting and ensure this regional conflict wouldn't snowball into a third world war between the U.S., backing Israel, and the USSR, backing the Arabs. The calm before the storm. On the morning of June 8, 1967, the Liberty arrived at her designated position, roughly 23 nautical miles off the coast of El Arish. It was a typical summer day. Clear skies, bright sunshine, calm seas, and perfect visibility. The vibe on board was incredibly relaxed, with zero tension. Life on the Liberty actually had its perks. Because her massive computers and advanced radio gear generated intense heat, the entire ship was fully air-conditioned by a giant central system, a luxury that was extremely rare back then. The crew's morale was high, and they felt totally safe for several reasons. Legal waters. Being in international waters meant they had every legal right to be there. Clear identity. The ship's name, USS Liberty, was painted in bold, clear English letters across her stern, along with her hull number, GTR-5, painted in giant white characters on both sides of the bow and stern. Unique profile. She looked nothing like a standard cargo ship or a typical combat warship, thanks to a massive microwave dish and a forest of specialized antennas crowding her deck. The American flag. A pristine American flag was flying high and fluttering clearly in the wind. The crew genuinely believed that floating right next to their ally Israel was their ultimate insurance policy. No one had any clue that this perfect weather was just the calm before the storm. Documented reconnaissance. From the moment the sun came up on June 8th, Israeli planes began buzzing the Liberty. At around 5:45 a.m. Sinai time, the ship logged its first confirmed visual of an Israeli reconnaissance plane, a Nord Atlas. The plane was on a routine scouting patrol, looking for any unfamiliar warships in the area. The aircraft circled the ship to identify her and then headed back toward Israel. Declassified intelligence documents later proved that the observer on that plane, Major Yuri Meretz, clearly identified the ship's features and her GTR hull number. At 6 a.m., he reported to headquarters that she was a U.S. Navy vessel. Based on this, Israeli operations maps officially changed the ship's marker from red, unknown, to green, neutral. The crew and ship logs confirmed that Israeli aircraft flew over them between 8 to 12 times between 8:50 a.m. and 12:50 p.m. Officer James N.S., a survivor, later testified that the planes flew so low that the roar of their engines shook the deck. The crew could see the pilots with the naked eye, and they were literally waving and flashing peace signs at each other. The American sailors weren't worried at all. They thought the pilots were just checking in on them. They had no idea that every single lap these planes took was part of a trap being coordinated in Israeli war rooms. Hell breaks loose. The airstrikes. At 1:48 p.m., the sailors wrapped up a routine drill simulating a chemical attack. They headed up to the deck to take a break, eat lunch, catch some sun, and enjoy the beautiful weather. Then, at exactly 2 p.m., two French-made Dassault Mirage 3 fighters belonging to the Israeli Air Force appeared in the sky. The crew assumed it was just another casual flyby. But within seconds, the peaceful afternoon turned into an absolute war zone. The jets launched a direct, unprovoked assault, raking the ship with 30mm Defa cannons and rockets. The attack came down like a hailstorm. The primary targets were the communication antennas and the bridge, explicitly designed to paralyze the ship and cut her off from the outside world. In the opening salvo, Executive Officer Philip Armstrong and Intelligence Officer Steve Toth were instantly killed, and the ship's skipper, Captain William McGonigal, was severely wounded. Captain McGonigal immediately sounded the general quarters alarm, shouting over the intercom for the crew to man their battle stations. But it was too late. The initial blasts had already wiped out the ship's internal and external communications. The sailors responsible for the forward machine guns, including Curtis Johnson and David Skolak, were blown to pieces by the jets while they were still trying to load ammo. They never even got a single shot off. The ship's defenses, those four manually operated .50 caliber Brownings sitting on completely exposed mounts with zero armor protection, were utterly useless against supersonic Mirage jets flying at Mach 2. During one of the runs, rockets detonated fuel drums meant for the lifeboats, triggering a chain reaction of explosions and turning parts of the ship into a raging inferno. Just when the crew thought the worst was over, a second wave of airstrikes hit. Israeli Super Mystere jets swooped in and dropped payload after payload of napalm directly onto the deck. Within minutes, the entire front of the ship, the bridge, and the upper decks were engulfed in a horrific, sticky fire. The wounded and surviving crew members had to fight the flames desperately, knowing that if the fire reached the ammo and fuel reserves below, they would all be vaporized. The heroic SOS. From the moment the first rocket hit, the crew raced to the radio room to broadcast an SOS to the U.S. Sixth Fleet, which had aircraft carriers, the USS America and USS Saratoga, stationed in the eastern Mediterranean near Crete, about 400 to 500 miles away. But to their horror, they found that every single tactical frequency, and even the international distress frequencies, which are strictly protected under international law, were being hit with heavy, deliberate jamming. Whoever was attacking them knew exactly what they were doing and wanted to isolate the ship completely to finish her off in total silence. Amid the despair, a tiny antenna somehow survived the initial bombardment. The Israeli jets had focused on knocking out the massive, obvious antennas, missing this small one by pure luck. Knowing the stakes, a 23-year-old radioman named James Terry Halberdier did something incredibly brave. He ran out onto the open deck into a meat grinder of shrapnel, bullets, and burning napalm, dragging a long cable and manually splicing it into the lone surviving antenna. Despite being hit by shrapnel, he got the job done. At exactly 2:09 p.m., the Liberty's distress signal successfully broke through the jamming, a feat that later earned him the Silver Star. The moment the USS Saratoga picked up the signal, she scrambled fighter jets to defend the Liberty. However, Israeli listening posts intercepted the American transmission too. Realizing that Washington now knew what was happening, the Israeli jets immediately broke off the attack and vanished. The torpedo boat assault. Just 15 minutes after the planes left, around 2:24 p.m., 3 Israeli torpedo boats appeared on the horizon, this time clearly flying the Israeli flag. Because the attacking jets hadn't carried any markings, the American sailors, still oblivious to who was killing them, initially cheered, thinking their allies had finally arrived to rescue them. Since the ship's original flag had been burned to a crisp, Captain McGonigal ordered the crew to hoist their largest available American flag, a massive 7 by 13-foot holiday ensign. Sailor Stanley White rushed to run it up the mast where it flew perfectly in plain sight. But as soon as the Israeli boats closed the distance, They opened up on the defenseless ship with .50 caliber machine guns and 20mm and 40mm cannons. The armor-piercing rounds punched through the ship's steel hull like paper, killing helmsman Francis Brown and wounding dozens of sailors who were taking cover inside. Yet, this brutal strafing was just a distraction to keep the crew occupied while a much bigger nightmare was being launched underwater. At exactly 2:35 p.m., the boats launched 5 torpedoes. For missed, but one scored a direct hit on the starboard side. It slammed right into the ship's intelligence spaces, the exact compartment where the NSA analysts and linguists were stationed. The torpedo blew a catastrophic hole in the hull, 40 feet wide and 23 feet high, roughly the size of a multi-story building. The explosion was so violent that the 10,000-ton ship was lifted completely out of the water before crashing back down. That single blast instantly killed 25 Americans. They were either vaporized by the explosion or drowned in darkness as water, fuel, and oil instantly flooded the compartment. Captain McGonigal ordered the crew to prepare to abandon ship. Sailors rushed to throw the remaining yellow rubber life rafts into the water. In another blatant violation of international law, the Israeli torpedo boats moved in and began systematically shooting the empty life rafts with machine guns, destroying them to ensure no one could escape. Realizing his men were facing execution if they went into the water, the captain quickly canceled the evacuation order. The White House cover-up. When the news of the attack reached Washington, the administration of President Lyndon B. Johnson panicked. They were terrified of the public backlash, a massive split within the Democratic Party, and losing the crucial financial and political backing of the powerful Zionist lobby in the U.S. To bury the scandal, President Johnson and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara made a jaw-dropping decision. When the Sixth Fleet launched aircraft to defend the Liberty, the White House ordered the jets to turn around and leave the ship to die. Multiple survivors later testified that Johnson explicitly stated, "I don't care if the ship sinks. I will not embarrass my allies." He literally wanted the ship at the bottom of the ocean to bury the secret forever. To control the narrative, the government slapped the survivors with strict military gag orders. They were threatened with court-martial, military prison, and the loss of their pensions if they ever muttered a single word to a journalist, or even their own wives, about what happened. Families of the deceased received vague telegrams stating their sons had died in a maritime accident, with zero details. The wounded were evacuated under heavy military intelligence guard to hospitals in Germany and the States, kept in complete isolation. Some sailors were even forced to change their names. Survivor Mickey LeMay recalled waking up from a coma to a military intelligence officer telling him, "Your name isn't Mickey LeMay anymore. It's Smith. If anyone asks about the Liberty, you know nothing." On the diplomatic front, Secretary of State Dean Rusk, who privately maintained the attack was 100% deliberate, summoned Israeli Ambassador Avraham Harman, demanding answers. The ambassador put on a masterclass in feigned shock, claiming it was an unthinkable tragedy. Blackmail and the secret deal. On June 19, 1967, Newsweek published an exclusive leak from high-ranking officials confirming that the U.S. government knew the attack was deliberate because Israel suspected the Liberty was intercepting its classified operational messages. The leak sent the Israeli embassy and its political action committees in Washington into absolute hysteria. The Israeli government mobilized, labeling the accusations a blood libel, a highly sensitive historical term, and accused the U.S. administration of promoting anti-Semitism. Declassified Israeli diplomatic documents later revealed a highly coordinated campaign to blackmail President Johnson. Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, former director of the NSA, stated on the record that the U.S. administration faced blatant political extortion. If Johnson pushed the issue, the Zionist lobby would cut off all campaign donations and political backing for his upcoming 1968 presidential re-election campaign. To sweep the body count under the rug, Israel offered Johnson a massive, cynical geopolitical deal in exchange for adopting their official narrative. 1. Media protection. Johnson's approval ratings were in freefall due to the Vietnam War. Following the deal, mainstream media criticism of Vietnam mysteriously faded away almost overnight. 2. The Soviet SA-2 missiles. U.S. pilots in Vietnam were getting slaughtered by Soviet-supplied $75 Dvina surface-to-air missiles, codenamed SA-2 guidelines by NATO, and the U.S. had no electronic countermeasures to stop them. During the Six-Day War, the Israeli army captured 9 fully intact Soviet SA-2 missile batteries from retreating Egyptian forces in the Sinai, complete with radar systems and technical manuals. Israel handed these captured systems over to the Pentagon. This allowed U.S. engineers to reverse engineer them and build specialized jamming pods, completely altering the course of the Vietnam War. In return, the Johnson administration agreed to completely replace all of Israel's military losses from the war for free. Most importantly, top-down orders were issued to bury the Pentagon's investigation into the Liberty. The Sham investigation, a naval court of inquiry, headed by Admiral John S. McCain Jr. and executed by Admiral Isaac Kidd, was launched, but it was a total kangaroo court. Out of 260 survivors, only 14 were allowed to testify. Dozens of officers who had definitive proof that the attack was deliberate were completely ignored. Eyewitness testimonies regarding Israeli torpedo boats machine gunning the life rafts were systematically altered or completely deleted from the official record. Physical evidence of the napalm attack collected by the ship's doctor, Richard Kiepfer, was confiscated and destroyed by the committee. The word napalm was banned from the final report and replaced with vague terms like burning chemical agents. The American court never interviewed a single Israeli pilot, sailor, or official, choosing to blindly accept a report handed over by the Israeli government claiming it was an unfortunate case of mistaken identity. Instead of a diplomatic rupture, U.S. aid to Israel skyrocketed the very next year, jumping from $7 million in 1967 to over $25 million in 1968, and it has been compounding ever since. Johnson signed a sweeping intelligence sharing agreement with them, and since then, every single U.S. administration, Republican or Democrat, has adamantly refused to reopen the file. Why did Israel do it? The theories. Decades later, historians and intelligence officials are left with 2 primary theories explaining why Israel attacked its closest ally. The Golan Heights theory, backed by Admiral Thomas Maurer, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. On June 8, Israel was secretly preparing to invade Syria's Golan Heights the following day. Israel had explicitly lied to Washington, promising they had no territorial ambitions, because the U.S. feared a Syrian invasion would force the Soviet Union to intervene and start World War III. Israel was terrified that the Liberty's hyper-advanced spy equipment would catch wind of the imminent troop movements, alert Washington, and force Israel to halt the invasion. Therefore, the Liberty had to be silenced. The false flag theory. This theory suggests Israel intended to sink the ship completely, leave 0 survivors, and pin the blame on Egypt, since the ship was so close to Egyptian waters. This perfectly explains why the jets flew without markings, why they jammed international SOS frequencies, and why they shot the life rafts. The ultimate goal was to fabricate an Egyptian atrocity, so horrific that the American public would demand the U.S. military enter the war directly to fight alongside Israel. It is a chilling piece of history that shows just how dirty the game of geopolitics can get. What do you guys think really happened that day? Which theory makes the most sense to you? If you have another historical mystery or crazy story you want covered in a future breakdown, drop it in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and share this with anyone who loves real-world political thrillers. See you in the next one.